You guys are like the Thelma and Louise of food addiction, I decided as I was coming to the show. Because I was like, who invites like two people who are like separate entities? I was like, I don't really think of Molly and Clarissa as separate entities.
It is kind of our truth. We are but one. With different strengths, though, for sure. Definitely.
So we just too much, really, high on my list of people I adore. So that's good. Not always the case. And when you get on a Zoom call.
Absolutely.
Right.
Hi. Well, I was on your podcast like 3 years ago and she's a slow learner over here.
Well, we are honored to be here, Molly. Yes. We love you and everything you do.
Let's decide that at the end of the podcast.
Okay, fair.
Okay.
Oh, we kid. Hi. I have so many thoughtful questions to ask you. I'm so happy you guys are here. Why don't you introduce yourselves to us and then really want to like break it down. So many things, but tell us about you.
All right. Well,
do you introduce yourselves together?
We pretty much know that I usually go first. It's just our routine.
Okay, fabulous. So Clarissa's going to go first. Clarissa Kennedy is going to go first, and then Molly Painschab's going to go second. I'm ready.
So hello, Clarissa Kennedy. I'm very excited to be here. I'm a social worker, food addiction counselor, mental health and addictions certifications, and I've been working in the field of addictions for 15 plus years. I have a personal story as well of recovery from eating disorders, food addiction, and really for me, I also had alcohol use disorder. So for me, when I discovered food addiction, it really was the number one thing that healed my substance use disorder as well.
Did you do it in that order? Did you do food and then alcohol?
Well, I think originally I started for sure with food because anorexia at 19, and then discovered how much I loved alcohol because then I didn't have to think about what I was eating and just kind of shut off the noise. Then I was in a car accident and was prescribed Percocet. So that was also, an excellent tool for somebody who doesn't want to eat a lot because it shuts off appetite.
Right.
And felt like it just gave me superpowers. And so after I got off both of those things, I really still just struggled with alcohol. There would be a return to use after 8 months, just a binge episode. But, I stopped eating fat at the age of 19 and not one little ounce. Right. Mustard was my condiment of choice.
And vinegar. And let's not forget its best friend, vinegar.
Of
you ever
course.
make that salad dressing with just like mustard and vinegar and like equal? Take me back to my fat camp days.
Totally.
I know, like right when we thought we couldn't be closer, I bring back the.
It's so true.
And like sometimes you'd go crazy and use like Dijon mustard. I'd be like, ooh,
that's a wild day. I don't even know. It's a little spicy. But yeah, so essentially I always check myself into treatment sober, but dying to figure out what I was missing. And I just so happened on my last treatment center, I explained my history to the doctor, and the doctor turned around and said, "Have you ever heard of food addiction?" And it was Dr. Tarman.
Oh my God, it was Vera Tarman. Wait, yes. Listen, I don't know this story. That's a really interesting story. I'm not that easily impressed. Explain to us who Vera Tarman is for those who don't know.
Dr. Tarman wrote the book on one of the major books on food addiction called Food Junkies. And so she essentially is a massive educator in it. I'd never heard of it. I trained in done so many courses throughout my education, worked in multiple addictions with cross addictions, never heard of food addiction.
Where was she working? This is just like, talk about it.
So she's actually the medical director of Renaissance, which is in Toronto. And I had tried, through my car accident, I got some really, a settlement, and I used that money for private treatment, the best of the best.
Right.
And so that didn't work. So I was like, I'm going to go to a free one. And that is honestly where I found my solution. And she just was like, "Oh, you should read this book." And lights went off. It was like everything finally made sense for me. And yeah, my cravings for alcohol, I really have not ever, like, when I used to be in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and I would see people and they would just get it and they would feel alive.
Yeah.
I was not
Drug
drinking,
addicts.
but I never felt that feeling until I changed the food, and that changed my life.
Wow.
So
So
that
when you, Molly will get to you. I'm just in the middle of something. I'm having a moment. So when you broke up with sugar and flour, the cravings for alcohol went away. So many people in my community come after they've given up alcohol and they're like, I literally can't stop eating. And I'm like, totally. But you actually did it the other way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is also reinforces my need to just remain abstinent, because it's like, this really did fix me. Eating this way, this disease lives in our brain, right? And so by,
yes.
100%. And so by fueling myself in the proper way, I think also having fat for the first time in 15, 16 years, probably helped a little, since
Just
our brains are,
society.
made of fat. They kind of need that to work. It was like, oh, I get how people do life now.
Oh my gosh.
So
You are
yes.
you are like this is my experience of you. Like, you are like the essence, both of you, of like joie de vivre. Like, you like live life. Like, it's like you like are like the kind, like, I lost a few years. I'm like gonna be in so big,
Making
so
it all
hard.
up right now.
Yeah. Yeah. She's here for
because
it.
it's a blessing, right? Because, like, how is it that now I get to have the podcast with her and work
No, it's like
alongside
that's,
her?
but they don't know. They're like, okay, like here's like the clincher of that story. Not only is she like in the free rehab, and this random doctor says to her, you're a food addict, that's your problem. And she's like, okay. By the way, like, that's an enormous part of the story that you listened and then like followed through with it.
Yeah.
She's cravings free. And then Vera Tarman, that very same doctor, asks her to start a podcast.
Yep.
I think we're done.
Period.
Clock it at 8 minutes. I'm not sure. How is this going to get better? I believe I have deep faith in spirituality, but like,
I know, right?
really hit that
It's
one
a
out of the park.
purpose.
That's a really good introduction, Clarissa. I feel a little worried for Louise over here, but let's try.
Be worried. It's a little anticlimactic, my story, for sure.
Well, first of all, if you're watching this on YouTube, which I encourage you to, Molly has dyed her hair purple.
Yeah. And blue and pink. I'm a unicorn.
I'm
a My Little Pony.
To your story of food addiction, can I ask a little bit about the genesis of the hair color?
Sure. So I am an 80s baby. So I really grew up in the punk era, or, towards the end of the punk era. And that was always kind of, Molly means rebel. I'm sure you know that.
Does it? I didn't know that.
It does. So Molly means, yeah. And I feel
I am learning so much today.
Like
I clocked that at 9 minutes in. Okay, great. Mm-hmm. Okay,
yeah,
Molly
I
means
feel
rebel.
like
I can't wait to tell my mom that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. I feel like I really embodied that,
not
on purpose.
Molly means rebel. Okay.
It does. It does.
In what language?
That is a good question. I feel like it's Irish.
Yeah.
So I was named after my Irish grandmother, who was Mary Margaret. So Molly is often what they call daughters in Ireland, who are named after their mothers, Mary. And then my sister is Maggie, which is typically short for Margaret. So
I'm learning.
We were named after my Irish grandmother. Yeah. So I was always really like, I don't know. And it probably was a product of, like my parents' divorce and being the oldest of four and like all of that, like adverse childhood experience kind of, stuff that happens to so many of us. It's not that abnormal. But I was always like pushing the limits. Like I would have blue hair, I would have green hair, I would like make my own skirts out of like blue jeans that I would like buy and sew together, and shirts that I would make myself. And then I went to college and I was still doing it. And then the voice got in my head, the like, oh, you're not professional. Like you being you is not professional. Like who's ever going to take you seriously? And I'm the people please. Like, I was like, oh my God, somebody would not like me because I have piercings and tattoos and my hair is colored and whatever. So I was like trying to norm myself up, like be more acceptable to the greater public. And, probably in the last 3 years or so, I've just really kind of started, the closer I've gotten to 40, I've really just started to let that go. And so So I cut my hair really short a while back, and then it's just then I've started doing peekaboo colors underneath, and now I'm just like, you know what? Who cares at this point? It doesn't make me any less capable of doing my job. And it makes
and like fluff them. You guys are so committed to your practice. Oh my God. So this is just you being in full expression of yourself.
This is me. This is me. Yes.
And fluff anyone who doesn't like it.
Amen.
I'm here for that.
Yeah.
That's basically my New Year's resolution. That's like, just be happy. Like, I just want to enjoy my life. That's like my only objective.
That's it.
Trust God and enjoy my life. That's it.
Yes. Yes.
Imagine.
Absolutely.
So that's how you got purple hair. How did you become the other half of Clarissa and Molly here in our beautiful food addiction world?
Yeah, so I started in the field back in 2005. I helped open what's called a pre-release here in Gallatin County. So we were a 40-bed all-male facility.
But you live in Montana?
I do live in Montana. So these guys were coming out of prison or other Department of Correction programs, and basically they had earned a spot. Like, they had to get approval from the Board of Parole. Somebody had to approve them to come to our facility, and then the deal was they came and we treated the addiction and the criminality, and they were going out and they could work during the day, all of that. And so that's how I got started in it. I realized that the guys who had mental health issues were the ones falling through the cracks. They were going back to jail, prison. They were like having to go back to some kind of program a lot more often than the guys who didn't have the traditional like mental health kind of stuff, anxiety, depression, bipolar, huge, right? Schizophrenia. And so that's when I decided to get my master's degree. And so then it's just kind of like the rest is history. So I've been in the field since 2005. I worked, suicide crisis hotlines. I was a sexual assault advocate, where I was like,
how do you get to food addiction from that?
I know, right? I know. So meanwhile, I'm doing my own work, right? So at like 22, I had this experience. My boss from the pre-release, a person who will forever hold a place in my heart, great mentor. She facilitated this group one day and asked me to come and co-facilitate. And it was on, like if you've ever done the group or talked to clients about it, where like everybody kind of has a role in the family. So there's like the identified patient, and then there's like the codependent, and then there's like the enabler and the hero and the lost child and the middle child. Well, so she's doing this group that day, and she looks over at me, and we lock eyes, and I just start bawling, because I realized that my life, like what I had known my life, like it was all playing out in this like 2-hour group that we're having with these guys. Right. And so I was like, oh God, I got to go do something about this. So I started doing my own work, and I always thought it was codependency and like these adverse childhood experiences. And even though all the while I'm doing the work, I'm still like saying like, hey, I'm still doing this emotional eating thing. And nobody's really like kind of latching onto it, because I've let go of the alcohol. I've like let go. I've created boundaries with my mother. I've kind of let go of some stuff from my past, so nobody's really saying anything. And I read Vera's book in 2017, 2018 ish, and put it together. And then I was really feeling bad at that point, because here I am, a licensed addiction counselor, a licensed mental health clinician, and I have no idea. It's not on my radar at all that this could even have ever been a thing.
How did you get your hands on Vera's book?
So I was I was following a gal on Instagram who and she like picked up the book, and she's like showing it, and she's like, I'm reading this, it's life-changing, give it a shot. So I did. And I've never looked back. So I immediately started researching, how can I add this to my practice? Like, how do I get trained in this so that, I can help clients, because I'm sure this is contributing to my heroin addicts who are coming in, and methamphetamine, alcohol.
As per Clarissa's story, for sure.
Right, exactly. And I found Esther's program out of.
So just remind us who Esther is for those.
Yeah, so Esther is in Iceland, and if I practice her last name, I can say it, and I don't want to murder it on
just murder it for fun.
It's Esther Goodman's-daughter, I believe.
I bet that's exactly right.
Yeah,
and so take a risk there, Mom.
Okay, so she runs the Infact School out of Iceland, and so I got involved in her program, and part of the program is you go for a week. Clarissa got to go to Iceland. I went to Canada. That's how I met Clarissa. She was there, like helping out with the intensive, essentially, that we were going through at that point. And so that's how we met. Is I did the program. Clarissa had done it a year or two earlier. We met in person there. We got teamed up. I was trying to like do the whole thing. I said, listen, I want to try out this 12-step thing. I need a sponsor, but I'm a two-hatter, so I'm going to be very particular about who it is that sponsors me, because I've done all my own work, and I was kind of, I don't know, like, I was a little skeptical.
Aren't those famous last words? Wait, can we just pause the story? Wait, I want you to unmute Clarissa. Clarissa, you're laughing too. I want to hear your laughter.
Yeah.
It's a joyous show. Wait, aren't those the most like that? When those words come out of my mouth, I know there's another fluff and growth opportunity. When I'm like, no, I've already done that. I've done that work. I've done my work. It's like the universe is like, that's adorable.
Yeah. Exactly.
Isn't that sweet?
Exactly.
And I love this part where you're like, no, there needs to be someone like very special.
Yep.
Going to be able to like help me.
But I put that out to the universe, and the universe paired us together. So Clarissa kind of took on that role for me, in walking me through the 12 steps and doing the 12-step work for like the next 6 to 8 months. I think it was, 2 hours at a time.
No idea.
Yeah.
There's like a sponsorship in this, and besties for the resties.
Yeah.
And it was so nice because then at that time, like, probably Molly, working in the field, I was like a solo agent. Like nobody from my class was practicing. I would have known
you back then. It was just like me and my Scarlet F letter walking around in New York City with people being like, it's not addictive, it's intuitive eating. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to go somewhere else now.
Exactly. So I had this practice, I had these clients, and like, I just was waiting for people to be like, oh, come out, like, oh, it's not really a thing. But then once I met Molly, it was like, oh, okay, she believes in this too. It is really helping. And like having that person really then we're just like, okay, we're doing this. Let's have a podcast and go from there.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And if you don't mind me saying, I think you both give more to this community than any two people. It's aspirational. I don't have it in me, but it's aspirational. My question is this. If you had to tell the audience, because you guys have done a ton, your podcast is completely focused on food addiction, and your lives are you're really in the field. I'd say in a way that I don't know anybody else who is. I think you have this beautiful balance of being so relatable, but then really, really well educated. If you guys had to break down the top, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that we really need to understand about how to recover from food addiction, like what are we missing?
Well, I think to start, definitely needs to be a low exposure food plan. And I think some guidance around
what's a low exposure food plan.
So these are going to be foods that don't create a mental obsession for you, foods that you don't or foods that you experience a loss of control over, you need to remove from your food plan. And these are the foods that if they're not in your house, there can be tons of foods in your house, and you will leave your house and go to the store to get that one thing. So
you'd say complete elimination of that is the first step.
Absolutely. And so what we know of them is ultra processed foods, essentially tend to be, having that hedonic factor. And I think that's important, but a low exposure food plan also addresses that homeostatic pathway, which is physical hunger. You have to eat enough food. And that is the number one thing that when client comes in, no matter what body size, if they are needing to restore weight or release weight, they're always restricting. And I think that is the hardest practice to get people to develop just eating 3 meals a day. They all want to do the fasting, and they all want to do I want to start eating at 1. And hey, I was there. Me too. I did those things. Eating breakfast is still my biggest challenge because it's just not, I like that morning anorexia feeling.
Sure.
So
what are your neural pathways, right?
Absolutely.
That says that when we have the history of diet trauma, that when we restrict, it cues our brain that there's going to be a binge later on. I actually think that is the least talked about data that explains everything. That the minute we wait till kickoff, our brains are like, oh, amazing.
Right. And now when you add in breakfast, you don't get that binge
Right.
anymore.
Right.
You've had enough food for the day.
Right.
So, that's definitely, I would say, low exposure food plan, making sure people are sleeping, doing some kind of mindfulness practice. Like a mindful eating practice is also really essential for the individuals I work with when I see them do well, because food has been the enemy. And now we're working on helping them develop and create a relationship with food. And it doesn't have to be, and it's not like that lusty, secretive relationship that we used to do with like our intimate, um, it's just like a more like food is food. I can still enjoy it. I still love my food, but I don't lust after my food. And so having that mindful eating practice, learning, because if it's not necessarily the foods we're eating, it's the way we're eating them. So that can be a bit of a behavioral addiction. I see process addiction for people with the speed of eating. So that's another essential tool.
You've seen I still really think you guys have such a plethora of knowledge given like the enormous amount of food addiction experts. But when you're saying that speed of eating is like a process addiction, can you say more about that? Or what
Yeah,
you
well,
guys have learned about that?
I think from what I see with clients and what, definitely some of the work that Tracy Burrows is doing out of Australia, and they really talk about that, hand to mouth numbing out. And that, in that moment, we are getting a high and we are unable, like our hunger and fullness cues are not going to be working when we are in that addictive eating cycle. And I think that we have to break that cycle in order to see the reason why we are eating that way. And it's hard. Like a lot of clients don't even want to put their fork down.
Oh my gosh, you should have seen me just eat my lunch. I mean,
Yeah.
I probably
And
could be like in your community. I was
I can
shoveling that
slip back in.
chickpea pasta down my throat before our 2 o'clock podcast. Not the poster child over here, folks. Sorry
No,
about that. Sorry,
but
not sorry.
that's no, don't be sorry, because that's reality. And
Yes.
we are all about recovering in reality. And I think that that is the other thing that we really work on is advocating for that self-compassion in recovery, rather than that, diet mentality, beat yourself up when things don't go awry. Like you said, I mean, I use your slash your tire analogy with every client.
Yeah.
And it is the one that resonates with everyone. And it's diet culture,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I don't know what I mean, in the years I've been doing this, I have to say that the more people who struggle in their relationship with food that I meet who have actually a primary struggle with diet culture, and I would actually say weight, because I don't think you can struggle with diet culture and not struggle with weight. And so when I think about when the research that I know about in abusive relationships and intermittent reinforcement, that abusive cycle, the target is actually the number on a scale. If we took that out, we'd have some body image stuff, whatever, but it'd be such a different chase because it's so like gambling addiction in that way.
Well, it is exactly. It's that reward prediction error that I never know what that number is going to be on the scale. And dopamine's all about anticipation, right? And so it's like playing a game, and it's like whatever number that's going to be, it's never going to be enough, or it's going to be like, oh, let's reward myself. So it's never a positive thing that you're giving this power to this little piece of metal or whatever it is. But it absolutely also speaks to the addictive process as well, which we also have to work on as people to let go of weighing themselves.
Makes sense that speed eating would be it. I guess maybe because I'm such a speed eater often, that it is such because you can't, what you're saying is the speed eating conflicts with our feeling of fullness, which makes you accidentally maybe even overeat.
Well, yeah, you definitely overconsume, specifically if we know it takes about 20 minutes for like peptide YY to signal the brain you've had enough. So if I've already ate my bowl, I'm not really connected to what I'm eating. I'm definitely not in relationship with it. I go get more and I eat in the same way, and then I'm overfull.
Right.
But
yeah,
go ahead. No,
well,
Molly,
I was going to say because the stomach, right? Because the way that we know fullness is two different ways. It's that neuropeptide YY, but also the stretch.
Wait, girls, for the third grader in the background, can you please tell us what neuropeptide YY is?
Go ahead, Clarissa.
Well, essentially, from what I understand it, it's is it not an amino acid? It's basically what gets released to signal the brain that you've had enough food. And it is at the base, right,
Oh,
of
so
the
that's
intestine.
what 20 minutes is
Right.
actually
So
a
it's the
commute.
chemical. Yep.
It's a
exactly.
commute. It's got to commute from the bottom of
Yes,
the stomach to
100%.
the top.
the- yeah.
It's a 20-minute commute. Got
Correct.
it. That
But
makes so
that's
much
the other
sense.
piece with the fast eating is that stretch. So if we're eating quickly, right, and even if we do a check-in and we're like, oh, I'm still not full, we'll go back and overconsume more because now we're looking for the stretch. And the stretch, depending on how fast we're putting it into our bodies, right, is going to come a lot faster than that 20 minutes.
That's really interesting. That's like I mean, obviously everything in me wants to stop the podcast because I don't want to hear this information, but that's for me and my therapist on Monday, I guess. Okay. Mal.
Yeah.
I want to hear a little bit more because I love food. Like on Food Junkies, like what is like the stuff that has just blown your mind and shifted your practice? I love the stuff about the food plan that we take the foods out. I have like 100 more questions to follow up, but I want to hear what you found to be like.
I think for me, it's just this reminder. So, if I think back to, again, I started out in traditional substance use disorder, mental health, right, process addiction kind of world. And think about it, right, Molly, I know you come from that background too. When we're treating people with alcohol use disorder, we're not telling them what they can and can't drink. We're not saying, we're not having people like give drink logs or anything like that. But a lot of times that happens with food. And I think for me, it was this reminder that we have to get back to like what is actually recovery. And so it is these other things like self-compassion, dealing with grief and loss, anxiety, so some of the most mind-blowing things, I guess, that I have experienced just in interviewing other people is this reminder that so much of what we do with food addiction is undoing diet culture, but that need for that information, it's almost like we're always looking for like, what is the next diet? And so it's like that reminder to shift people, like it's important, but it's not important because it's about that, but it's not really about that. It's about this other stuff, right? There's this 90% of the iceberg under the water that we can't see that actually is continuing to, like compel you to repeat the substance use or the behavior or both. And we need to actually dig at that. So some of my most favorite interviews have been like with the people that do that work that really remind us that, again, we have to take we walk that tiger, whatever. We take it out of the cage 3 times a day. Or
I take it out 4 times a day, just in case.
Yeah, well, 4 times. Yeah, 6 times. How many other times works for you?
I have a beloved 4 o'clock snack.
Yes.
Yes. Anyone's wondering.
But I think that's the other piece of it too, is like reminding ourselves that, it's so funny. I got into this training and I had like another person in this, and I was like, well, this isn't meth. And somebody was like, but isn't it like meth? And at the time I was like,
you're like, well, if it was 1976 and we were like, had a diet, had Weight Watcher circles, like someone said that to me too. I was like, I'm not as nice as you guys. I was like, that's literally the most antiquated thing that I've heard. Like there's a lot of problems in our world, but the advances we've made in the understanding of the human body and its ability to metabolize is off the charts.
Exactly. So at first, I was really taken aback. I was like, oh my God, this is so life or death in the moment. And then I'm like, Molly, get it together. You literally have clients ODing and dying in the bathroom at the local town pump with heroin, with meth, right? They're not ODing and dying from the food piece of it. This is a more nuanced approach. Does it have bad outcomes if this continues? Yes, but we've got time. And so I think just like having
Molly, that's beautiful. I mean, but it's sort of pro and con on that, isn't it? Like we have time and yet we have no time.
Exactly. And people know they have time, and that's what makes it more challenging to work with, to
say the least. I think it's right. We get some great, I had a patient who was talking to me about his daughter once, and she was really deep in the food, and I said, yeah, it sounds like she probably needs to come to this on her own, because that's how we know that real change happens. And he was like, what if I was telling you that she was shooting up heroin? And I was like, well, you're not telling me that. And so we have a little time to let her build a bottom and get help on her own, which is a pro, but very hard as a parent to watch that happen. I mean, it is really the pro and the con of relationship with food. And I don't know, you guys feel about this. I'm super curious. Like, There is, oh God, I'm really going to get some feedback on this, but I'm here for it because Molly dyed her hair purple, and this is my truth. There's a selfishness that comes with obsession with food that is, and I mean like selfishness, my definition will be like so full of ourselves and our needs and the way it has to be exactly that we can't see outside to what other people need, to how we're impacting other people.
Mhm.
And diet culture and orthorexia culture and all of that is like, has like confirmed that we should be that way. Like, is it organic? I don't know. And not to say it isn't important to eat healthy
Exactly.
foods, but
Yes.
the world is really missing out on a lot of us who are so deeply embedded in like healthy eating as an eating disorder.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Or disordered eating at the very least. Right. And that we're so obsessed with it and it's celebrated. And I think, again, that's where, guests like yourself, David Wiss, just to
Oh,
name a few that come to mind, right? Where it's
who
really,
doesn't love David Wiss?
no, but it was
Right?
right. And that's just it. Like, it was so good because you guys have brought me back to my senses where I can go back to what do I know? My educated intuition treating all those other substances, right? What do I know? How do we treat this? And those things absolutely work. Absolutely work with the food. And we found that when we did the research.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your research, you fancy Nancy's. What was the hypothesis? What did you do? What did you come up with?
Well, I think it was really interesting for us because we really didn't know the level of success that people would have with this level of intervention around food addiction. However, we'd been predominantly seeing people in private practice, a much more intensive, than usually outpatient counselor, clinician kind of practice that I think both of us set up because we just knew there's more cues and triggers with food. However, people did incredible.
So what was the
And
study? Like what
so
happened?
the
What did
study
you
was we recruited individuals off of Facebook and through, other media outlets for individuals who identified with food addiction symptoms based on the DSM, whether it was the IMYFAS or Jen Unwin has created
That's
a
the
crave.
food addiction scale. I'm
Yeah.
just here to dumb it
Yeah,
down.
yeah. No, that's good. So essentially, all of those same criteria for people who meet substance use disorder, right? Use despite negative consequences. So they met the criteria. And then we just did about 10 weeks of psychoeducation around food addiction. We did craving management. We talked about abstinence withdrawal. We talked about hope and resilience, stress management, emotional eating. The last week was body, and we kind of tried to do it in a way we might do in private practice with clients, but like over the long term, kind of just a 10-week intervention. Does this make a change for them
In a group setting?
Yeah,
in a group setting, and they had
setting.
never, the key was that they couldn't, like, they were like brand new to treatment for food addiction. They'd never had treatment.
Wow.
So essentially they created their own food plan. It was a self-directed food plan. We said, the low carbohydrate is really all we said. Eliminate the ultra processed foods,
But not no carbohydrate.
No,
Okay.
no. Lot like, people had rice, grains,
Right.
potatoes, like real
Right.
food. We just said eat real food.
Mhm.
That's pretty essential. And then, work with them around creating, what does this work for you? How does this make you feel? And then kind of talk to them about what the addictive foods, how it would make them respond. And by that, they created their own food plan. So we measured, pre-intervention, we measured their Yale food addiction symptoms, their level of well-being, and their BMI, which we didn't really care about, but we know the world cares about. So, like 10 weeks later, after the intervention, we took those same measurements and their food addiction symptoms had universally gone down. We also did this in Sweden, and a team in Sweden and a team in the UK. Food addiction symptoms had gone down, level of well-being went up, and their body mass index went down. So, obviously a pretty positive report for a 10-week intervention.
Say the least.
Where
Wow.
we spent 1, maybe 2 weeks talking about food, the other 8, 9, we're talking about everything that is recovery.
Yeah. Don't have to convince me of that.
Yeah.
Made
Right.
a podcast called What You're Craving.
Yeah.
Because I think honestly, and I wonder what y'all think about this, but like, I think honestly, I think when we make it too much about the food, it's that perfectionistic brain that's waking up and saying, oh, I'm going to get my grips into you and you're never letting this go.
Yeah. And I think most people have like a food plan addiction as
Oh,
well when we first get it and their information. Like when I first started working with people, I never had to explain about dopamine, serotonin, neurotransmitters to the alcohol and drug user. They didn't care about that, but this is critical information on like the vagus nerve and all of these other aspects that individuals are seeking information on. And I'm like, that's great that you have this information, but we need action. And we need to look at your life because obviously you are trying to escape your life in some way. There's something going on there and you're using food to escape your life. So let's talk about your life and your routine and what are things you do for yourself? What does self-care look like?
about these people. Okay. But like, I think we're talking in really ideal terms here. Cause even when I hear you say like, let go of the foods that trigger you, I'm like, there's a part of that that's like, no shift, no shift, Sherlock. But like, what about, I'm just thinking of a couple of people I know and more parenthetically, I don't treat them who I see try to get into the game, give it a really, I think every time all of us try, it's with just earnestness and myself included, it's like, took me 13 years to get 13 years. And they're trying with earnest and they're maybe even joining your program or my program or whatever. And then I don't know how to say it, but they can't do it. And they certainly can't do the things that we're asking them to do, which is like these really exact things that you're saying, Clarissa. They're saying like, they really can't give up all the foods because they have kids that live in the house. Whatever. I don't, that's a defense mechanism, but that's also their truth. I hate the word excuses. Fire your coach if they use the word excuse. Look at them in the face and say, I prefer you use defense mechanism. Stop shaming me with the word excuses. Okay, back to the podcast.
Yes.
I'm just trying to teach everybody how to have a good coach.
I think that's
Good.
it. I'm
It's
a big
essential.
believer that everybody has really good reasons for doing the things that they do.
Brad
These are
Reedy
not
told me.
excuses. Yeah.
When Brad Reedy, best therapist I know in the world, his therapist once said to him, you know what, Brad, if you screwed a duck, I would believe that there's a really good reason why you screwed a duck. And I just try to be that person in every part of my life.
Yes.
As a godmother, as a friend, as a therapist, like in every part of my life, I'm like, I want to understand what's happening here. Yeah. And in DBT, we always say assess, don't assume. And I think it's one of the greatest things Marcia ever said, assess, don't assume. Because when we use assumptions, we're so out of the game. Anyway, so really try that. They can't do these things that you're asking, like, of course, like they're like, I can't, I have kids and they need their cookies. And then they're like, I forget the other things. They're like, what do we do with, like, what do we say to the person who just can't get it?
But what can they do?
Yeah.
Like I would rather go to
say.
like what are they capable of doing? Like what can be let go of or hidden away? Or I've got kids in my house too, and we put stuff on top of the refrigerator. We put stuff like I have my own shelf that's at my eye level. My kids have their own shelf at their eye level.
Well,
that smart. Like what can you do?
Don't underestimate that as a skill. Yeah, that's a great
yeah.
Yeah. I will ask my husband, like he'll buy the Costco sized bag of trail mix. I'm like, please take that to your office or put that out in the garage somewhere. He'll do it. Right. So I think it goes back to like, what can you do? And does it have to be perfect? No, I was just speaking to somebody the other day who she was like, and she's trying so hard and she is going through so much right now. Right. And so she has gone to inpatient treatment. So she's done a couple different things. She's done residential, she's done inpatient treatment, all of these things. Going through one of the most tumultuous years of her life. And of course she's back she's back in the food. Why wouldn't you be like, that's your number one coping skill for the last 50 years. Why would that not be activated? So it's just like finding this self-compassion. She's had several weeks of, sticking to what she had planned for the day for her food. And then the other day she ran out of time to eat lunch. She has this appointment. She grabs a handful of chocolate covered almonds and she eats them. And she was like, at first she was like, the voice showed up and said, all right, you screwed up, F it, go to town, go have the night of your life. She said, and then I thought to myself, no, wait a minute. What do I need? Oh, I just need to go home and have my dinner.
Yeah.
That's what I need to do. I just need to go home and have my dinner. And it, right. So that there may be a coach out there. There may be a program out there. There may be somebody out there that would say, well, you screwed the pooch, abstinence over, restart your days, whatever it might be. But that didn't happen, as she's telling me. And now she's moved forward, right, instead of just saying, now I'm stuck in that thing again. So it goes back to like, what can you do?
Yeah. And I think it's also like, so I'm answering my own question in case anyone's wondering.
Love it.
Thank you for loving me. I'm also like reminded as we're talking about this, and I think it's so important for the listener, like the primary feeling behind sabotage is fear. And I think sometimes like leaning into talk about self-compassion. I love also sort of gentle examination and curiosity. Like, and Marsha Linehan always says, you know, when we're feeling willful, we need to ask ourselves, you know, what am I feeling threatened by? That's not allowing for me to do what I know is right. You know, what is my threat? And so all of these, again, what a really untreated coach would call an excuse, they're all defenses. Like a lot of what it is to get through addiction, which is basically learn how to trust, right, is getting through these defenses and understanding what they're doing for you.
And defenses, I mean, and so this is like where my sensitivity comes in, right? Like defenses, you guys, like not in the fact of like, oh, this is denial or like you're so defensive, but that in that you're not feeling safe. There is something inside of you that does not feel safe, and your brain is doing what it's supposed to do. You are literally wired to show up and do these things.
Yes. You're seeking safety.
Safe, not happy. And that's where like the mindfulness comes in, because in order to reroute that, you have to be like very awake. It's not like you can't do it. It's just that it's so automatic that you're going to have to like wake up and be like, hold on, like exactly what your client did. Like her automatic response would be like, eat the covered trauma and like go get froyo. And like we have to wake up to be like, hold up, wait a minute, take a step back. What do I want to do? That just takes a lot of attention.
It is. And I think it is really exhausting for people too, to be so hyper vigilant all day long when they are in early recovery. And I think some of that mental exhaustion is what also can bring them back to the food, is they just want to break, you know, and they haven't yet
I've been abstinent like 13 years and I feel that.
Yeah, right. Me too. It's a challenge. Like there is it's recoveries.
I decide what I want to have for dinner, and like Burger King or chickpea pasta. Sometimes I'm just like, I can't.
Yeah.
Today.
That's it. Right. And so it's like, it's having that like love to say, hey, you know, this happened. Like, as Marty would say, so what? No, now what?
Right? So here's my question. Am I wrong to say that you guys, you friends have so old. Also, Molly, your 40s are like the greatest thing that ever happened to you. Just from
awesome. I'm excited.
From the midline of the 40s. They're just amazing. Like,
it's true. People
dye your hair and you do you. It's just the greatest. People do not talk about enough how great it is to be in your 40s. You just care less and less. It's amazing.
It's true.
Is it safe to say, because and this might be wrong, but have you guys softened in the last years? I feel like you guys were a bit more rigid when I knew you.
We asked this question of our guests because it happened to us. I remember in my first interview, it was like our first actual guest episode with David Wiss. And I asked him, you know, can people use sugar again if they are in recovery? And he said, well, I think that might be true. There's a lot of healing that goes on. And
it's true with young alcohol users too, Clarissa.
Right? Yeah,
young alcohol users that abstain can sometimes bring it back. I know. And it just touches our own self, right?
Yeah. And I think in the education that we received, that was some of the messaging that was there. And then being in practice.
Wait, what messaging did you receive in training?
Yeah, that it's like this hard line, like I was saying, like where I had this classmate, if you will, say like, well, it's like that. And I bought into that, right?
Even though we were already harm reduction clinicians and working with substance use, with
you guys
harm
were
reduction.
Like and then you get into the food addiction world, which is
very old
God,
school.
Half the reason I wrote Breaking Up with Sugar, half the reason was in opposition to the rigidity
of we don't fit.
bright,
No, we
you
don't
know,
do
of
it.
that
Yeah.
like really rigid, you have to weigh and measure and bring your scale out and there's no gum and there's no coffee and I'm like,
Yes.
that's not how I do it. And that's not, if you're going to get there, you're not going to get there that way. You won't stay there. So you guys
Right.
have softened in the years, huh? Go David Wiss. He really softened. He can really soften a girl.
Yeah.
I think again, though, I think it was more of like coming back to who we knew we were. I don't know. And I shouldn't speak for you, Clarissa, but I know for me, like, that's how I always practiced was this
and
more
for
like kind of
me,
yeah.
Being like coming from somebody who was so diet my whole life, this new recovery felt like diet, and that was gross. That
Totally.
didn't feel good for me at all.
So you both softened your own food plans as a result.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I had started out pretty soft because I didn't come into this going, I'm a food addict. I actually went into it. I kind of skipped a part in there. Like I went into it trying to heal polycystic ovarian syndrome. So I adopted like a keto type, eating style. And then, so that's the gal I was following on Instagram or whatever, just some gal that I was following that was also doing it, trying to heal her polycystic ovarian syndrome, and then read the book. And then that's when I started getting into the world. So I never went into it like, oh my God, I'm a food addict and I need to get sober. It was more of like, I need to eliminate these things that are potentially aggravating this other diagnosis that I have going on. Wow. And then, yes. So then when I started diving in, it got rigid. And I got really discouraged.
Wow. Because you couldn't stop lapsing.
It wasn't even that. I was just getting really discouraged and really angry. And it wasn't even lapsing. I kept going back to eating more of that keto way that wasn't in line with the food plan that I was told I had to have.
Right. Right. The diet plan.
Right. Yeah. Right. So now, right.
However, so now but I just want a devil's advocate. It's not, there is a part I think about in the beginning of my Breaking Up with Sugar Facebook group, someone was talking about planning and this teacher posted and she said, I'm a 7th grade science teacher. And if I just walked into the classroom without a lesson plan, I would, I'm really good at my job. I still wouldn't know what to do. I think there's something to say in the beginning when
yes,
you're
100%.
rewiring,
it's
to
important.
Have some really solid guidance, like solid, like bit in your mouth. That's what at least for me in the beginning, when I really made this honest attempt to do this, and by the way, I was like screaming on my kitchen floor, but it was like portions, time, quality, all the things. And then once I found myself again, I was like, all right, I'm only going to measure these things, or I'm just going to go out to dinner and eat what I need to. Like it was easier then, and it's more of an ebb and flow.
But that came because you trusted yourself. Mm-hmm. You found that trust in yourself again. And the thing is like, I had trust in myself, and then I was treating what I thought I was treating a medical, and still to this day, I'm choosing foods, right? That like help that.
It's right. Mucosa, right? Yeah, like the treatment for PCOS is also the treatment for food addiction.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying is, but I was trusting myself. And then because of who I am, right? Again, this is my trauma, right? My survival showed up and said, people, please just lean into what they're right. Like, don't be rejected by the group. So then I bought into that rigidity and that food plan. And then I got discouraged and I felt like I didn't really have anybody. Clarissa was the only person I felt like I could be honest with and talk to. And then I met you and Marty, right? So then Susan Pierce Thompson, like there are these other voices out there that really let me know like, oh, wait a minute, you can go back to you can trust you can find you again.
Wait, hold on. I really, this is an honest question.
Yes.
I don't think of Susan Pierce Thompson as a harm reductionist.
No, not as a harm reductionist, but
she's the author of a book called Bright Line Eating.
Right.
Not in that book, Resume, she has changed her message.
Has changed. At the time, though,
all of it, but that is important to note that
that's the most restrictive food plan I've seen in the history of my life, without any options for perfectionism. I think it can set someone up
100%.
As an eating disorder, absolutely trained. That program can really mess with someone.
Who was bucking the system as far as we're in our camps, we're in the eating disorder world or we're in the food addiction world. She was a person who was bucking traditional food addiction line, the traditional food addiction line with the professionals, not necessarily in her message, but in her relationship to the greater group.
Really? I think OA was
Yes.
doing that. I think
You
OA
were
Gray
doing that.
I
You were
wasn't.
doing
No.
that.
I think Overeaters Anonymous Gray Sheet was doing that for
Oh, no,
many
no.
years.
Right. But I guess what I'm saying is that I found these other voices that just let me know.
I'm just saying that voice
people are
is
out there
not
marching
one of,
to-
I think, is harm reduction.
Sure.
I think
That's
she's helped a
fair.
lot of
No,
people. I
Yep,
think a lot
I
of people
agree.
need that
I
kind of
agree.
rigidity.
Yeah.
That is not a voice. I'm happy to
No.
talk to her about it. That's not
And-
a voice of harm reduction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of the individuals that come to see me are coming to see me because they're starving. They're
A lot of
hungry.
individuals
They
that come
need
to see me
food.
can't
Yeah.
stay on that program. And they
Yeah.
say,
No.
oh my God, this is what I'm looking for because
And
that
I've
program gives me
challenged
no
that.
alternatives.
Yeah.
I've challenged her. I've challenged some other people on that, and it didn't. It's a conversation, but certainly they are not going to. Anybody who's like a hardline, bright line eating whatever is not going to convince me otherwise, and vice versa.
1000%.
Yeah.
And listen, we protect our substance.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
also have to say, I've treated a lot of people who I'm like, hey, what if we expand this? What if you try this? They're like not interested because they're not interested. And that's their right too. I mean, there's
Mhm.
rigidity is
Absolutely.
your God-given right also. It's just if that
Yes.
doesn't, the idea of rigidity just makes me want to binge. So there we are.
Right. Yeah.
But I think
No, again,
sometimes some of that messaging we received in the early beginning was not trust yourself. You can't eat
Yes.
apples. You can't eat
Right.
grains, all of this
Apples or
stuff.
grains.
And like,
But I think what we're saying here is also like so important, which is the idea that Brad Reedy said this I'm very into Brad Reedy today. You should follow him. He's incredible.
I do because of you, just so you
Oh,
know.
thank you. I'm just like his biggest fan.
I bought his book too.
Oh, it's so good. Okay. So we have Wiss and we have like our own little fan.
Yeah.
We're going to have little pictures like when we were teenagers. But I think what we're saying, because Brad Reedy once said in some webinar I was doing with him, somebody said, what if I can't find my people? And Brad's like, your people are there. Don't worry about it. And I think even in the world of feeling like you're in an unhealthy relationship with food, this harm reduction stuff may be like, guys, I need more support than what you're willing to tell me to do. And there's people for that.
100%.
And you may be sitting with these people who are not nutritionists saying to you, it's this much and you got to weigh and measure it. And you can be like, oh, these ain't my people. And by the way, like my friends here, like in the middle of it, you could be like, hey, you know what? I'm a harm reductionist now. We eat apples.
Yeah.
So that's a beautiful part, ain't it?
I think that's it. We were always harm reductionists. It's just we woke up. We're like,
We're
oh, wait a
trapped.
minute. Food actually isn't all that different. It's different, but it's not all that different from these other substances.
And also the way that those substances are best treated that are abstinence-based
harm
substances.
reduction.
Is
Yes.
harm reduction.
Yes.
This is what no one's talking about.
Right.
Marsha
I know.
Linehan's DBT for substance use model is all what I use for eating disorders. And that's doing something you can actually stop.
Yes.
Oh, could I talk to you all day? Yes.
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 Do I like to not waste people's time and make my podcast more than ever? Yes. Will you come on again? We didn't
Definitely.
even scratch.
I know. I really want, because what we found is another conversation that we want to figure out a good way to talk about, but we haven't figured out is like, how do you talk to somebody about releasing weight? Because that's so important. And it's a real thing for people we work with. And anyone in the eating disorder world is like, even when we were in SunCloud, like love it. It's like, that's just not something we talk about, but that just is our reality.
That's going to be our next podcast.
Yes,
we need to,
can
because if we have these conversations about weight restoration, I feel like those of us who live in larger bodies, that is a concern.
And also,
we
like,
deserve a
I'm sorry,
conversation.
but like, I'll leave it at this. You have the right to weigh what you want.
Yes.
Like, that's it. That's it.
Yes.
And if you're in a size 18 body and you don't want to be in it, like, let's try to do something about that and love it while it's at that size 18 body. It's kind of not that complicated, but I want to have another podcast. So let's pretend like it's complicated. I love you. Where can we find you, beautiful friends of mine?
So I think the best place to find us is at www.sweetsobriety.ca. That's where we do our monthly
that'll be
coaching.
in the show notes.
Yeah.
Sweetsobriety.ca. And for those, there's so many Canadians. And so it's great to know that.
Yeah. And we also have
help.
the Food Junkies podcast where Molly's been a guest as well. So yeah, check us out there too.
Amazing. I love you guys so much. I can't actually, like, really, I'm having you on again. I love you. I love you. And by the way, these women give so much of their time and energy to people who need it. And that is really what we're here on this earth to do. So thank you for that. Just as a collective. Love you both so much. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Molly.